Alright, moving right along to story number 2. Gang, you know as well as I that since the end of May, we have been on a continuous slide downward, where now everything is racist. If you believe in grammar, that's racist. If you believe in objectivity, in meritocracy, if you believe in being punctual and on time, you are actually racist because you are engaging in white supremacy. Okay? Anything that you do, basically, if you are just biologically Caucasian, then you are racist, whether you realize it or not. Well, now even bird names are racist. And I kid you not. This is from Slate magazine. Headline: Scientists are having a reckoning over a bird named for a Confederate general. Yes, that is true. A bird named after a Confederate general is now part of the evil sin of racism, white supremacy, and discrimination that this country has been offering since 1619, because as we know from the 1619 Project, the actual date of this country's founding wasn't 1776, but was actually 1619. Now, the bird in question is McCowen's longspur, which Slate describes as looking rather like a sparrow. And it lives in, I should say, the Great Plains. So it's native to Oklahoma, Kansas, the western part of Nebraska, the Dakotas, where the Great Plains are. And in 1851, John Porter McCowen shot one of these birds, and he sent it to a naturalist. And this was the first time that this particular bird had actually been brought in, seen, studied, observed, etc., etc., etc. So the naturalist, when he wrote up his observations on the bird and everything, he named it after McCowen, because that's usually the tradition in the natural sciences. When a new species is discovered, either of plant or of animal, then usually the common names, we're not talking about the Latin name, which gives the genus and the species, but the common name, the name by which most people like you and I know it by, it's going to be named after the man who discovered it. Okay, so in this case, the naturalist named it after McCowen's longspur. But because he left the United States Army and became a Confederate general during the Civil War, according to Slate, this means that the entire name, that the name is not just out of date, but it is actually oppressive. This is actually what Slate says, quote, "By memorializing someone who fought to defend slavery, the longspur's name, some birders and scientists say, adds further barriers to inclusion in the world of bird researchers and enthusiasts, an overwhelmingly white community where people of color have repeatedly reported feeling ignored, excluded, and even deeply unsafe." Now, Slate then goes on to actually quote an Aaron McGee, a PhD student in conservation biology at the University of Arizona, and an organizer of a group which is called, no kidding, Black Birders Week, an online campaign to celebrate and increase visibility of black birders and nature enthusiasts. This PhD student, this Aaron McGee, said, quote, "Naming and language have power. The way that you use language tells people whether they belong or not. When scientists refuse to stop using terms that are steeped in racism, that tells black people and other people of color that they don't matter, that they're not important." And so, of course, as usual, because there's not hardly a single vertebrae in this country anymore, there's nothing like that. So because we live in that sort of environment, the American Ornithological Society has promised. It has promised that, oh yes, we will consider renaming the longspur. We will look at its name, which basically is just the prelude, which means that, yeah, they're going to rename this entire species of bird simply because the man who discovered the species was not woke, okay? I mean, you could say that it's not his fault since he was born over 200 years ago, but that's just an excuse. That's just your white privilege and your white supremacy showing, okay? He wasn't woke by 21st century standards in 1851 and 1861, therefore, he must be expunged from the public record. Now, there are a couple of things about this, okay? First and foremost, how many people knew that McCowen's longspur was actually named after, specifically, John Porter McCowen, who then fought for the Confederacy? How many people knew that before this article ran on Slate? How many people had even heard of McCowen's longspur? I'm going to guess not very many. If you pulled over 100 people, if you pulled over 500 people, and asked them, A, if they knew what a McCowen longspur was, and B, if they knew whom the longspur, McCowen's longspur, was named after, I'm going to bet that you would have only a very, 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 very minute percentage of the people you asked be able to answer either one of the questions. And the people who would be able to actually answer both questions would be even smaller. So we are changing an entire bird's name over something when the vast majority of the population doesn't even know that this thing exists. And if they do know that this thing exists, probably don't know whom it's named after. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, like I said before, it is customary, it is tradition that a new species is named after the person who discovers it. Right? That's just the way it is, because you discovered it. It'd be like if you discovered, the famous Western Passage between to the east. You know, everyone from Christopher Columbus and Henry Hudson were looking for it. It would be named after you, more than likely, because you discovered it. Okay, it's just a way to show honor to the individual, because hey, you made a discovery. You increased our knowledge, either of one of the hard sciences or of the natural world, and therefore we are going to honor you. This is, in a way, it's the reward. It's an attaboy, good boy, you, or good girl. You know, you increased our knowledge, which used to be a good thing. That used to actually be one of the bedrocks of Western civilization. The increase of knowledge, that used to be one of the bedrocks of human nature itself, to increase in knowledge and wisdom. But apparently that is no longer the case. Well, we know that it's not the case because, of course, Western civilization is just evil, imperialistic, and white supremacist. So it all has to go by the wayside. And this is what they're doing. Not only by changing the longspur's name. And again, this seems like a minute detail. It'd be like, Nate, why are you ranting and raving? Why are you making a whole chapter of this episode about a bird that I didn't even know existed until 5 minutes ago? And I sure as heck didn't know that it was named after, a Confederate general whom no one really remembers anymore. It's for this it's for a specific reason, game, because everything, as I've said before, that the left does, however silly, however trivial, however trite, there is always a deeper reason behind it, okay? And this is one of those deeper reasons, because when the American Ornithological Society does change the longspur's name, and again, I have no reason to doubt that they will change its name, because they're a bunch of gutless wonders who are terrified of being called racists, of being called white supremacists, who are terrified of being accused of bigotry and of perpetuating prejudice and hatred and the whole 9 yards. And they're also terrified of the fact that the mob will come for them, their jobs, their careers, their reputations, their families, etc., etc., etc. When that happens, when that, in all likelihood, inevitability happens, a precedent will have been set that, again, facts don't matter. You can make maybe one of the greatest leaps of historical knowledge, of human knowledge possible, okay? Maybe you actually solve the problem of time travel, or you solve faster than light speed, okay? That problem. You figure out a way to actually travel the speed of light. But unfortunately, when you were 15 years old, and you were on Twitter, and you kind of made a joke that could, when you kind of squinted at it hard, could be seen as being racially sensitive. Sorry. You will not get the credit for your discovery. We're not going to name it after you. We're going to name it after someone else. And more than likely, we're not even going to mention you when we talk about the discoveries. This is another rewriting of history. This is another way of delegitimizing people based on their own beliefs, and in some cases, their own mistakes and their own actions. Or, as we saw with Mr. McCowen, simply because he was a product of his time. He lived in his time, and we refuse to actually take him at face value with his time, then you are erased. Doesn't matter what you did. Doesn't matter how you helped people. Doesn't matter what your discovery means for the country, the world, for people's lives, or anything like that. You are erased. As far as we're concerned, you didn't make this discovery. History will actively be rewritten. That's what it really boils down to. History will actively be rewritten, okay? That's the second thing. The third thing, and this is sort of the general, this is actually the core and heart of what this story gets to, okay? Nothing is going to be left untouched by this revolutionary moment. I've said it before, okay? The goal is to completely remake not just politics, not just the culture, not just academia, not just the entertainment, even more than they are now, but everything. Everything that, not just that we hold dear, but everything that we're used to. It's going to go into every single nook and cranny, okay? Something as minute and niched as the American Ornithological Society. Which, again, people usually are not avid bird watchers. Yeah, we look at birds, but it's a very niche group of people who actually do that for a hobby and do it passionately. Nothing is going to be overturned because the left still came after it. The mob still came after them. They came after the Ornithological Society. For what? For keeping the name of a bird. For keeping the name of a bird, because guess what? This particular guy discovered it in 1851. That was their crime. That was it. And they came after them. And they even brought in the big guns. They brought in a PhD student. So there are no safe spaces anymore. I'm going to repeat myself here a bit, gang, but there are no safe spaces. There is only fight or flight at this point. We can hunker down and accept the new regime and hope to God that it just passes over us and we don't get into any sort of trouble, or we can fight, because there is going to be no neutral ground. There is no neutral ground whatsoever. That is what McCowen's longspur shows us in 2020. 1851, it was an advancement of human knowledge, however small, because it was a new species that we now knew existed. Today, it is just another sign that we are under siege in every conceivable direction. That is now the legacy of McCowen's longspur, and that is story number 2.